This is a 44-year-old premenopausal lady from West Bengal, married since 24 years, housewife, presented with chief complaints of abdominal pain, abdominal distension, and loss of appetite for the past 3 months. She was apparently normal 3 months back when she started having a vague lower abdominal pain, followed by abdominal distension 2 weeks later. And the abdominal pain, it has mildly increased for the last 3 weeks, radiating to bilateral lower limbs, not associated with food intake or movement. There was history of loss of appetite present, no history of loss of weight, no history of bleeding or discharge per vaginum, no history of altered bowel habits or bleeding per rectum, no history of bladder disturbances, no history of mass coming out per vaginum, no history of vomiting or hematemesis, no history of cough dyspnea, or no history of any groin swelling. Coming to menstrual or obstetric history, she attained menarche at the age of 12 years and first childbirth at the age of 22 years. She's para 2, live 2, no abortion, normal vaginal delivery. And last menstrual period was in August 2021, 4/30-day cycle, regular, and the flow was normal. Past history, no history of no comorbidities or no previous hospital admission or previous surgery. Personal history, no addictions, normal bowel and bladder habits, and non-vegetarian. Family history, there's no family history of cancer or no history of past history of TB in the family. Coming to the summary, so she is a 44-year-old premenopausal lady. She presented with chief complaints of abdominal pain, abdominal distension, and loss of appetite for the past 3 months. So based on the summary, my differential diagnosis will be pelvic or adnexal mass neoplasm. Second be a GI primary. Third, metastasis, Berry-Krukenberg's, or a tuberculosis. Can I proceed, ma'am? Coming to examination, she is PS1, conscious, oriented, cooperative, moderately built, no pallor, icterus, or edema. Vitals are stable. Inspection of the abdomen. Abdomen is distended, no asymmetry or swelling. Umbilicus central, no nodule visible at the umbilicus. Skin of the abdomen, no scars, sinuses, or dilated veins. Abdominal striae present. Flanks appear full, no visible peristalsis. Hernial orifices were free. And external genitalia is normal, no discharge, genital prolapse, or lesions in the vulva, and no fullness in the groin. Coming to the palpation, no tenderness, godding, or rigidity. There is a 15/10 centimeter lobulated cystic mass with restricted mobility felt in the hypogastrium, and multiple nodular deposit. It is felt all over the abdomen, more in the bilateral lower quadrant of the abdomen. No hepatosplenomegaly. Percussion over the mass, it is dull, and there is no shifting dullness. Bowel sounds are now normal. Per speculum examination, cervix and vagina healthy. Per vaginal and per rectal examination, mass spread through the left fornix and the pouch of Douglas, and the rectal mucosa is free. No linguinal lymph nodes. An examination of bilateral breast, axilla, and supraclavicular fossa is normal. Systemic examination, cardiovascular system, normal S1, S2 earth, and respiratory system is bilateral air entry is earth. So, coming to the case summary, she is a 44-year-old premenopausal female with abdominal pain, distension, and loss of appetite for the past 3 months, and found to have a 15/10 centimeter a lobulated mass in the pelvic region with multiple nodular deposits present all over the abdomen. So my differential diagnosis being first being a malignant adnexal mass, second being a metastasis Berry-Krukenberg tumor.
Naveen, so based on your history and examination,
Yes, ma'am.
points favoring your DD of malignant adnexal mass and points favoring Krukenberg.
Yes, ma'am. First, malignant adnexal mass. She's a 44-year-old premenopausal lady. Complaints being abdominal pain, distension, and loss of appetite, with adnexal mass with pelvic mass being present 15/10 centimeter and presence of nodular deposits all over the abdomen. This most probably on examination also it looks like an adnexal mass, and so this probably favors more on malignant adnexal mass, and in case of metastasis, actually ruling out the GI primary, the only is clinical finding. She doesn't have any GI
From your
symptoms.
history, can you rule out GI? I mean, whenever you have been asked to say point out the points favoring and not favoring, you have to start with history. For as per history, how would you rule out GI primary or Krukenberg's?
Yes, ma'am. As per history, only one finding is loss of appetite is present. Otherwise, there is no GI symptoms like vomiting, hematemesis, or bowel disturbances or anything. Nothing is present. So only with loss of appetite, and there is no loss of weight. And
did you
abdominal
ask
pain
for
is there.
history of melena in history?
No?
History of melena in history, did you ask that?
Yes, ma'am. No history of bowel disturbances or bleeding per rectum. There's nothing is there.
Okay. In examination?
And
How would you
examination
rule out
wise,
GI primary?
examination wise, there is a pelvic mass is present with the nodular deposit. Still, we cannot rule out by examination. It is very query a GI primary or not.
Have you done per rectal examination?
By rectal examination, rectal mucosa is free, but still a colonic mass, appendicular mass or colonic mass, because our abdomen is distended with nodular deposits present all over the abdomen.
Okay. So you asked in detail regarding the obstetric history. What is the importance of obstetric history in your patient now, in this case?
She is a premenopausal lady, and aged menarche is 12, early menarche, and childbirth also it's less than 35 years. Aged first childbirth, it is 22 years. These are productive factors.
Predictive factor of what?
Hello.
A predictive factor of what?
These can be the productive factors for the ovarian cancer or breast.
How these factors will predict ovarian cancer?
No, so
Hello.
So what is the risk of breast cancer if a patient has first childbirth before 30 years and after 30 years of age? Do you know the relative risk?
Sorry, ma'am. Relative risk, I don't know.
See, whatever you will say in your case presentation, your question will be asked based on that.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so if you ask such question, your whole viva will be diverted to the relative risk factor. I mean, relative risk of various factors that can increase the risk of breast cancer and ovarian cancer.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, but you should know, irrespective of, I mean, these are the minimum thing which is expected out of you. Dr. Jay was trying to ask you something.
no, sorry, no, I didn't ask because I think I'd missed out on the initial history because I was trying to log in through the other things. So can you just, in one line, please summarize the history and the findings?
Yes, ma'am. She is a 44-year-old premenopausal lady with abdominal pain, abdominal distension, and loss of appetite for 3 months. Examination found to have 15 by 10 centimeter lobulated cystic mass, and in the pelvic hypogastric region, and multiple nodular deposits.
Examination, 1 second. You've shown the investigation findings also, is that?
No, ma'am, not it, ma'am.
Oh, no.
How
Only
did you
the
know
clinical
lobulated cystic mass on examination? Huh?
It is actually
You can't be, you can't say cystic, you know, you'll have to have, on clinical examination, you can say cystic. I mean, is it a cystic mass that you feel in the hypogastrium? You breathe. Hello?
Actually, yes, ma'am. it's like fluid component was present, so only on palpation.
And it's a mobile mass. That's what you restricted mobility.
Because it's a large mass, not able to move.
Okay, I think you've already discussed the differential diagnosis. So how will you go about investigating this patient? And I assume that you've already told about the per vaginal and per rectal examination, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So coming to the investigations, I'll do a blood investigations workup with a complete blood count, renal function test, liver function test, serum electrolytes, viral markers, nutritional workup, blood grouping and typing, coagulation profile, and tumor markers, CA-125, CEA, and contrast and CT scan of thorax, abdomen, and pelvis. So for this patient, the blood investigations were normal with tumor marker CA-125 was 535 and CA was less than 1.
You don't want to do CA 19.9 here?
Yes, ma'am. CA 19.9A is also less than 5.
You did not even list them.
Okay.
Because the GI primary is also one of the differential. And Krukenberg is also one of the differential.
Hello?
Okay, go ahead. What are the CT scan findings?
This is the contrast and the CT scan. Showing multiple omental and peritoneal deposits with large lobulated cystic mass in the pelvic region.
No, but were you able to feel this mass? I mean, this is all inside the pelvis. You said you felt a 15 centimeter mass. I've not cross-checked your clinical findings. You said you felt a 15 centimeter solid cystic mass.
Yes.
So, but this mass is entirely confined within the pelvis. I mean, so I'm not sure that you have been able to feel this mass that solid cystic. Sorry?
It was coming.
So I couldn't hear you.
It was about 12 to 15 centimeter was present, ma'am.
No, but this is within the pelvis. Per abdominally, will you not be able to feel this mass? Anyways, I think we'll discuss about clinical findings for this patient at bed. I mean, maybe for one person at bedside. But so what, after you've done your investigations, what are your differentials now?
Still a malignant adnexal mass, being it's so first one is a malignant adnexal mass, second one can be still metastasis. Very crucial.
So can you point out the adnexal mass? You said solid cystic mass in the adnexa, mental deposits, and how do you plan to go about confirming your diagnosis?
The CT scan.
So you said that on the, can you just point out, I don't know whether it will be able to point out on that, which is the mass that you are talking about. Okay, and which are the omental deposits?
These are the omental deposits.
Okay, so how will you go about now? You have this lady with whatever omental deposits, ovarian mass. So what will you do next?
So I will proceed with USG guided biopsy of the omental deposits now.
Okay. So can you also biopsy the pelvic mass?
Yes, ma'am. Solid component is present. So we can go ahead with the USG guided pelvic mass biopsy also.
So any situation where you would not want to biopsy the pelvic mass, not in this patient, but other patient?
When the patient is found to have early stage ovarian cancer, then we should not go ahead with the pelvic mass biopsy.
Yeah, so what I wanted to say was that for patients with early stage ovarian cancers, do not biopsy the pelvic mass. Here, of course, she has disease in the omentum and others. So what is the biopsy finding for this patient?
So biopsy has been done, which are proved to be high-grade serous adenocarcinoma. IHC was positive for EMA, PAX8, WT1, and CK7. And negative was CK20 and inhibin. P53 was wild type, and mitotic count was 12/10. So in view of high mitotic count, favoring a high-grade serous carcinoma than a low-grade serous adenocarcinoma.
So what I wanted to ask is, can you just tell me in this, what are the features favoring a high grade? What is like against a high grade serous carcinoma? You just read out a whole lot of IHC markers. Can you tell me what is like the meaning of PAX8, WT1, CK7, and sorry?
CK7 positive, CK20 negative, it's for ovarian malignancy.
Only ovarian, CK7 positive.
Epithelial ovarian malignancy confirmed.
Okay, if you have somebody with CK7 positive, CK20 negative, what are your differential diagnoses? Is it only ovary?
No, ma'am, not only ovary.
So if you have, can it be a breast primary if you have CK7 positive, 20 negative? Not in this patient, she has, but I'm just asking because you said CK7 positive, CK20 negative confirms an ovarian primary.
Not confirming.
You can say it is. It is not from GI, but 7 positive, 20 negative is like because in this context we are considering for epithelial. That is what I mean. Ovarian malignancy we can say suggestive of. And what about PAX8 and WT1? What do they signify?
PAX8 and WT1 suggestive of serous adenocarcinoma. Mullerian origin.
No, PAX8 is. So there are two different things. PAX8 is suggestive of Mullerian origin and WT1 more for serous. Okay. And here the patient has P53 wild type. So
actually in a high P53 and P16 will be diffusely positive.
No, P16 has nothing to do with ovarian cancer. Why are you bringing P16 in between?
For high grade versus low grade differentiation.
P16 is not in the picture. P16 is when you do for looking at cervical primaries. So P16 does not come in here. It is P53 staining, and P53 wild type is generally seen in low grade malignancies, and P53 mutated is what is seen in high grade, most high grade ovarian cancers. So that is a little that is why I think you see that line that grading is difficult to offer, but because of other morphological features, they have called to keep in mind does not have a response to chemotherapy. Okay.
And moreover, if you look at the CT scan, there is a significant disease burden. There are big omental deposits, peritoneal deposits, but CA125 is only 500.
Yes,
right? In such patient, you would expect very high CA125, not in 500s.
And also, what is something that you commonly find in these patients which you don't find here in the CT scan finding?
This much multiple omental and peritoneal deposit, ascites actually only mild.
Yes, so you should also look for there's no ascites. So, I mean, these are some of the features which are not in this patient, but anyways, finally they have concluded for high grade serous. Okay, so what next?
So she is diagnosed to have high grade serous adenocarcinoma ovary, stage 3C.
So is the staging radiologic staging or a surgical staging?
For this patient, it is radiologic staging.
But is the FIGO staging that you normally have, is it radiological or is it surgical?
It is surgical staging, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So anything else, any other investigation you would like to send for this patient? Will you refer her to some other for investigation?
Genetic screening, I will send her.
And why
Before
would
you
you
send
send
her
her for genetic clinic?
Since she is less than 45 years with primary ovarian malignancy.
Anything to do with the histology also? I
Yeah.
mean, even if she was 55 years of age and she had high grade serous, would that be an indication to send?
Hello.
So Dr. Jaya is asking if the patient would have been 55-year-old and high-grade serous histology, would you still send her for genetic clinic, or you would not send because now she is more than 50 years?
So in other words, what we are trying to ask is what are the indications for genetic testing in patients with ovarian cancer?
Would you send all patients, or would you look at the histology, then decide? You look at age? You look at only family history?
Age factor less than 45, high grade serous ovarian carcinoma.
No, I don't think, I mean, see, we may not be able to.
So Naveen, if a patient has mucinous ovarian cancer, would you send that patient for
No, ma'am.
genetic clinic?
No, ma'am.
So ideal recommendation is that all patients with high-grade serous adenocarcinoma needs to be sent for genetic clinic. And why is so?
Because there is a 40 to 60% chance of BRCA positive being.
40 to 60. Where have you read that number? So incidence of BRCA mutation in high-grade serous versus other histology. Incidence of germline BRCA mutation, somatic mutation, or any other thing. I mean, BRCA mutation is not 40 to 50% in high-grade serous. Where have you read that?
Germline is 10%, ma'am.
Okay, germline is around 13 to 14. Then somatic?
Somatic was around
Hello?
40 to 50%.
So 40 to 50% is the
So what you want?
homologous repair pathway. It is not the BRCA mutation 40 to 50%.
Okay, ma'am. Okay.
Okay, so please be clear and read carefully.
Okay, ma'am. Sure.
And
Yes,
okay, so how will you go about managing this patient? No, I just wanted to say that, how will you manage? Because I think we have one short case and one thing also. How will you manage this patient?
So I will proceed this patient with neoadjuvant chemotherapy, Pacli plus carboplatin 3 cycles, then reassess with clinically CA125 and CT scan, thorax abdomen pelvis.
So what are the indications for neoadjuvant chemotherapy in this patient? Why would you want to go ahead with neoadjuvant chemotherapy? In this patient, you saw the CT scan. What are the findings on CT scan which would favor neoadjuvant chemo?
In this patient, there is diffuse involvement of the mesentery or started or large omental and peritoneal deposit. So I will go ahead for neoadjuvant chemotherapy in this patient.
Okay. And so you do a response assessment scan. At the end of 3 months, you find that the CA125 has gone down from, say, 535 to 300, and omental deposits show only a marginal decrease. Then what will you do? And the picture is largely the same. So you do commonly. So what I'm trying to ask is two things. what percentage of patients whom you give neoadjuvant chemotherapy are unlikely to respond, or how many percentage respond to chemotherapy? What percentage are unlikely to respond to neoadjuvant chemotherapy? And if they don't respond, what are the things that you would like to see? First, how many patients, you said you would give neoadjuvant chemotherapy. What will you tell the patient? What percentage are likely to
Percentage.
respond? Okay. You're giving chemotherapy, no? You should know how many will respond. 10%, 20%, 50, 100, all will respond. Some number.
Exact percentage I don't know.
Exact, no, at least you have some ballpark figure as to how many are likely to respond to chemotherapy.
60 to 70%.
Yes, so around 60 to 7, about 70% of these patients respond to neoadjuvant chemotherapy, you know. So the other way around, 20 to 30 of them will not respond to chemotherapy. So if a person does not respond to neoadjuvant chemotherapy, what are the things that you will want to kind of think of?
In histology, actually, we have to check whether it's low grade or high grade.
Yes, so of course this patient for this patient we did have a biopsy at baseline, but if we don't get a biopsy at baseline, in that situation we would want to go ahead and do a biopsy. So even if you just have a cytology and a cell block, if somebody does not have a biopsy at baseline, we would want to go back and do a biopsy. And in this patient, especially because P53 was wild type, that is something that you would want to go back and look at again. Okay. Okay. So fine. So now suppose, okay, this patient has had a good response to chemotherapy. CA125 has come down to whatever 70, and omental nodules have resolved. So what will you do next? What surgery?
Hello.
Hello. Yes, you can tell me.
Yes, ma'am. I'll go ahead with the interval debulking surgery for him.
What is interval debulking surgery? Can you define for the others? I mean, what will you do in the surgery?
So first, midline laparotomy, then fluid.
Yeah, tell me.
Fluid for sampling, peritoneal washings, then explore all the organs. If any suspicious areas still there, to biopsy. Then go ahead with total abdominal hysterectomy and bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy with omentectomy. And lymph nodes only sampling if it is any present, sampling or to be removed. Not systematic lymphadenectomy is not needed.
Okay. Okay. So any evidence for not doing lymph, you said you would not go ahead and do a lymph node sampling. So any evidence for that?
It was based on Lyon's trial, man. Where,
okay, that is fine. So now next, okay, you've done a surgery. What would you want to, you've achieved, what would you like to achieve in surgery? Optimal
cytoreduction, actually no less than 1 centimeter residual disease.
Is the
so no residual disease.
Hello.
So is the definition less than 1 centimeter or nothing left?
But now recent, actually no residual disease.
So you have to say recent only. No? Why do you want to still talk about the past thing?
Disease is what. Okay, so your surgeons might want to do something else during surgery.
Since she had multiple omental and peritoneal deposits, HIPEC can be tried, but due to increased risk of toxicities, it's still not the standard of care.
Okay, so what do you do in HIPEC, and why do you think, what are the toxicities that you expect? And is HIPEC if it has to be considered, is it in primary debulking or is it in interval debulking surgery?
In HIPEC,
So your surgical colleague asks you, your surgeon friend asks you, okay, that you're working as a team, should I take this patient up for HIPEC? So from your perspective, what are the things that you will see and guide him as to these are the patients you should or you should not take up for HIPEC? And where will you consider, as a you're the medical oncologist in the team, what drugs do you use in HIPEC? How will you, what are the factors that you will see, apart, of course, we may debate on, and what toxicities you would expect to see?
Yes, ma'am. Post 3 cycles, actually, during surgery, IDS, HIPEC has been tried. So where intraperitoneal catheter has been inserted and cisplatin 100 milligram per meter square has been given in those patients with significant omental and peritoneal deposits, stage 3 cancers, and the side effects mainly due to, it can be due to catheter-related infection, fever.
So here there is no catheter. You put the chemo inside, shake them up, heated chemo inside, and then you remove that. So catheter-related complications are mainly with more of intraperitoneal. Here you don't leave the catheter behind. The chemotherapy is given and then it is removed. So you don't leave that inside. Okay. So, and also what is most important is that during the surgery, that should be an optimal cytoreduced. If the surgery is not optimally cytoreduced, there is no indication for doing a HIPEC in that patient. Okay.
Yes.
And anything else, you just said 100 milligram per meter square of cisplatinum. So anything else you would want to check before and after? You forget about intraperitoneals. Even IV, if you want to give somebody 100 milligram per meter square of cisplatinum, what would you want to check?
Renal function has to be checked, ma'am. Creatinine clearance.
Yes, and renal function and creatinine clearance. For a 70-year-old, if you have a creatinine of 0.8 and her GFR is 40, that patient is not a candidate for HIPEC because her actually creatinine clearance may be less than 60. So those patients are going to have toxicity post, HIPEC. And even during that infusion, you need to monitor their fluids, electrolytes, and of course, subsequently also you need to check for renal dysfunction, electrolyte imbalance, and they can have exactly the similar complications as for IV cisplatinum if not given properly. And for those using 100 milligram per meter square, they also use thiosulfate. So today's day and age, I think you should, because whenever you're discussing IDS, you should also know about the HIPEC. Okay. So this patient underwent routine surgery, and after that, now for adjuvant treatment, what will you do?
So adjuvant, I will complete 3 more cycles, total 6 cycles of paclitaxel. And histology actually has to be checked before that.
Okay, so today only 3 cycles of paclitaxel. Anything else? Any other therapy that you would want to?
Would you like to consider any maintenance therapy? That's what Dr. Jia is asking.
Bevacizumab can be tried because he had a significant omental and
consider not.
Can be considered.
No, for this patient, so does bevacizumab maintenance have an overall survival benefit in which subgroup of patients?
Only in stage 4 or resection patients, it has a benefit. Other than that, the 2 in subgroup and subset only.
So it has a benefit in those who did not have an optimal cytoreduction or who had stage 4 disease, right? Now this patient used, of course, those were upfront surgery done. So really not for interval debulking surgery, but anyways, if we extrapolate that data also, now your patient has had an optimal cytoreduction done. And so of course, one would be a PFS advantage, not an overall survival advantage. So And how much is the PFS benefit that you expect with bevacizumab?
3 to 4 months, ma'am.
Yeah, it's about 3 months only. That is after a year of maintenance of bevacizumab. So, all that needs to be discussed. And if this patient has had an optimal cytoreduction, really, that is a very small PFS benefit, of course. But if you want to discuss, that can be discussed. But we need to keep in mind that a maintenance of 1 year will give a PFS advantage of only another 3 months. So really, if there are any other maintenance option, and how will you choose between the two maintenance options?
Since she is
And
high-grade.
is ob-
Yes, ma'am.
so basically, want to know that a patient with C ovary, we've given them 3 paclitaxel interval debulking surgery and 3 more adjuvant paclitaxel. Of course, as I said, that HIPEC is still not the routine standard of care because of its associated toxicity. But if someone wants to do that, that can be discussed. But regarding the maintenance therapies, what will you discuss with the patient, and how will you choose which maintenance, and is it okay to be on observation? So you'll have to tell us the median PFS, the benefit with each maintenance therapy.
Since she is high-grade serous adenocarcinoma, so would have been sent for gentle screen. So BRCA turned out to be positive. Then would have given the option of maintenance olaparib.
So given the option of maintenance olaparib, the patient asks you, doctor, how much is the benefit? What are the risks? What are the side effects?
Maintenance olaparib, based on SOLA-1 trial, it was the PFS benefit was that it was 60 months benefit was there versus 27.
Any side effect that you are worried about in first line maintenance?
The only one thing is cytopenias, anemia, neutropenias,
And for 1 to
And,
2%.
secondary malignancy chances also will be there.
Which secondary malignancy?
AML.
Yes, and this still does not have an overall survival benefit, but yes, the PFS benefit is huge. Yeah. Okay. And so if she is BRCA negative, then how do you go about it?
Then homologous recombination testing option can be given. If it is deficient, then still maintenance olaparib can be considered.
And if it is proficient, is there an advantage of giving PARP inhibitors?
Don't know, ma'am.
No. So if they are HRD proficient and non-BRCA mutated, giving adjuvant PARP has really not shown any benefit when Seema can elaborate on that. And so therefore, if it is and the magnitude of benefit is different if they are germline BRCA positive versus HRD positive and BRCA negative. So that advantage is only to the tune of, I think, 8 to 12 months as compared to, almost 40 months if they are BRCA mutated. Yeah. Yeah, Seema.
Yeah, so those who are HRD proficient, there the benefit in PFS is either not there or it is only 2 to 3 months, which is not clinically significant. So you would not consider in that subgroup.
Yes,
But the benefit varies depending upon the molecular subtype, and the maximum benefit in BRCA mutated positive population, followed by HRD deficient, and then HRD proficient, right?
Sure. I think it's already 9:17. So good, Naveen. I think we'll need to just brush up a few more things. And of course, I'm not discussing side effects of all the other drugs also is something that you need to know. Okay.
Yeah, and when you will say that you will give neoadjuvant chemotherapy, you say the complete answer. Pacli carbo at this dose at 3 weekly interval, right? Do not give a chance for the examiner to ask you again and again what dose, at what frequency.
Yeah,
Okay.
and but Other things like HIPEC, you don't go off on your own. Let the examiner give
Yeah, let
the
the examiner
opportunity
ask
to
you.
ask you. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So I think Shravan, the next one you can go ahead with. Thank you.
Shravan, you can start.
Yes, there is. Good morning, all. So today I'm going to present a short case. So this was a case of 31-year-old premenopausal lady who is married. She was resident of Orissa, homemaker. So presented to the ROPD with the chief complaints of constipation, bleeding per rectum since past 3 months duration, with history of diarrhea since 3 months, and with history of weight loss of unintentional weight loss of 5 kg over 1 month, and with history of generalized weakness. So patient was apparently well 3 months ago when she noticed passage of hot stools with the bleeding per rectum in the form of dog blood mixed with the stool. And she also had history of 4 to 5 episodes of slimy small quantity of stools for the initial 1 month, then followed by the increased frequency of around 7 to 8 times of the slimy stools, which are small quantity since past 2 months. And she also had a weight loss of 5 kg over 1 month with a history of anorexia. She also had history of generalized weakness. Otherwise, there is no history of any abdominal pain or no history of any vomiting, no history of any abdominal lump, no history of any abdominal distension, and there are no systemic symptoms. Past history, there was no significant past history of any medical comorbidities or surgeries, and there was no significant family history of any malignancies, and personal history is insignificant. And her menstrual cycles were regular, 5 by 28 days, normal flow, and obstetric history. She had 2 children, 2 were normal vaginal deliveries.
And I think Shravan, just 1 second, when you go back, even though it's a GI case, if you're looking at the menstrual history, you please ask their LMPs. The last menstrual periods, history of a missed period can present like anything else. Okay, yeah.
Fair point, ma'am. Yeah. The other thing is, Shravan, in the exam, if I'm not wrong, when you have a short case, you only have to present the positive findings. Am I right?
Yes, sir, positive.
Yeah. So for now, this is okay. I mean, you've presented it well. But remember that in the exam, you will only have to present the positive findings. And, so keep that in mind. Go on.
Yes.
Yeah.
So at the end of history, she's a 31-year-old premenopausal lady who had presented with the history of alternating bowel habits in form of spurious diarrhea with constipation, along with associated bleeding per rectum, with a significant unintentional weight loss, and with history of progressive fatigue.
So, Shravan, any reason for not labeling this purely as a rectal tumor?
Pure rectal tumor.
Because you've used a specific term in your history called spurious diarrhea.
Yes,
Very
sir.
rarely that will be presenting with anything beyond the rectum, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So, I mean, if you use spurious diarrhea, make sure that you're saying it's a rectal growth. Unlikely that a sigmoid growth or a growth anywhere up will present with, spurious diarrhea 1.
Yes.
If you're saying only alternating bowel habits and bleeding PR, I will agree with you that, you can have, non-rectal colonic cancers as well, right?
Yes.
Okay. Second thing is, okay, what are your differential diagnoses based on your history in this lady?
So,
From a pathological point of view, what would you think of from a differential diagnosis point of view?
So to begin with, the history is a chronic history of like 3 to 4 months, and which is ongoing with spurious diarrhea, with the change in bowel habits,
Sure.
and with significant weight loss, which is unintentional, and progressive fatigue. So most likely, this lady might be having malignant.
No, I think it very clearly this is definitely a malignancy. You don't have to justify that. What I mean, and if you go into that, then they will ask you about benign rectal syndrome and all that. Don't do that, right? So agree that we are dealing with a cancer. What kind of cancers would you consider in this lady?
So as a significant symptoms are alternating bowel habits with spurious diarrhea.
Don't repeat yourself, Shravan. Don't repeat yourself.
So
what is your differential diagnosis?
So this could be the rectal carcinoma.
Excellent. So when you say rectal carcinoma, that is just as good as saying rectal tumor, no?
Yes.
When pathology, what differential diagnosis would you put? Okay.
Hello.
You have a rectal growth.
Yes.
Hello.
Okay. What are the common diseases that you say? What are the common cancers that you see in that area?
So one is the carcinoma rectum, sir. Most probably, most likely adenocarcinoma, most commonly. Sorry.
Okay. Good.
And,
What else?
other can be rectal growth, melanomas. Really can rectal
okay.
anorectal melanomas.
Correct. So what I wanted to hear and what most examiners would want to know is, one, it could be a rectal adenoCA. Two, it could be a anal canal squamous cell cancer. And I mean anal canal cancer, what you refer to as. And yes, you can have melanomas, extranodal lymphomas. Okay. So the age of this lady is 31.
Yes. Yes.
Can you tell me the usual age presentations of these three tumors that we just listed? Rectal, anal canal, melanomas.
So
and why is that important?
Usually the rectal carcinoma starts after the fourth, fifth decade, sir, but there is a data to suggest that we have the younger incidence increasing nowadays. Even in our TMH data for 2017 demographic data, we have the median age of 47.2 years. So
not bad. Okay. What about squamous cell cancers?
So squamous cell carcinomas are more after the fifth and sixth decade most common.
Actually, sixth and seventh. Okay. Right. So this lady actually fits in none of. I mean, she's genuinely a young incidence cancer. Okay. Any other differential diagnosis? So three of them we agree upon. Could be rectal cancer, could be squamous cell cancer, could be melanoma, mucosal melanoma. Anything else? Malignant cause. Yeah.
Lymphomas.
Yeah. Rarely lymphomas in immunosuppressed individuals. You can have lymphomas presenting with rectal groups. Fair enough. Fair. Okay. Go on to your examination.
Yes. So general examination, patient was ECOG performance 2 at the time of examination. She was moderately built and nourished. Patient was conscious, coherent, cooperative at the time of examination. She had a moderate pallor. Otherwise, there is no icterus or palpable lymphadenopathy, peripheral palpable lymphadenopathy, or no edema.
Okay. Which lymphadenopathy did you actually examine for?
Sir, I've examined for the supraclavicular lymphadenopathy and axillary lymph nodes and pelvic inguinal regions.
So not pelvic, right? Inguinal, right?
Inguinal, no, sorry.
Correct. Okay. Assuming this was just for discussion's sake, if this was a squamous cell cancer,
yes.
Is inguinal mets or inguinal nodes involvement metastatic or non-metastatic in terms of staging?
Inguinal squamous.
Okay. If you don't know, it's okay. You can say you don't know. That's fine. It's non-metastatic. Okay. Right. Just remember that. That's also one of the questions. Yeah. Go on with your exam.
Yes. So height was 140 centimeters. Weight is 41 kg. BMI of 18.97, which is normal. And digital rectal examination, there was a hard fixed growth of which is palpated 6 to 7 centimeters from the anal verge. It is situated from 6 to 2 o'clock position, and proximal extent cannot be felt, and there is a blood stain on the gloved finger. And per vaginal examination was normal. Systemic examination.
What does 6 to 2 o'clock mean? I mean, I didn't understand that.
So the growth extent, circumferential growth extent.
Circumferential means it will be there everywhere.
Yes.
So explain what do you mean by 6 to 2 o'clock? I mean, is it an anteriorly based growth or a posteriorly based growth?
It is a posteriorly, anteriorly based growth.
Yeah,
Which,
okay.
yes.
Okay, then fair enough. Okay, yeah, go on.
Systemic examination was unremarkable, and upper abdomen examination, it is soft, no tenderness, no palpable organomegaly, bowel sounds were heard, no ascites.
Okay, go on. So anything that now helps you, zone into what the likelier primary is?
So from the history, spurious diarrhea with the positive finding of heart fixed growth at the rectum 6 to 7 centimeters from the anal verge. So most likely this could be the rectal malignancy.
You can't say lower GI malignancy now, man.
Yes.
Huh?
Yes, sir.
You found a growth, no?
Yes.
So it is a colorectal tumor, no?
Yes.
Then, so I mean, okay, lower GI malignancy, fine. In your history, I can understand. But abhi to clearly you have found a growth then. So you should be looking at, more pointed differential diagnosis, no? And those are the differential diagnosis that we discussed,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Okay. So colorectal cancer. Okay, fine. Take it. Can it be still a squamous cell cancer?
Cell carcinoma rectum.
Yeah, usually not. But I mean, what they say is that at the dentate line, no, occasionally some of these squamous cells which can migrate upwards, and you can have anal canal. Or, I mean, you can have squamous cell also. That's what I meant. But I agree with you. It's likely a colorectal adenosis. Okay. Go on to investigations, and what will you do?
Yes. So complete hemogram. She had a hemoglobin of 8.3 grams per deciliter with low MCV 77, and with a platelet count of 7.05 lakhs, which could be due to the bleeding the patient had, and baseline organ function tests were normal except the albumin, which is 3.3, and CA was 8.6 nanogram per ml, and CA 19.9 was normal, less than 2.
Go on.
For the local staging, I would like to do the patient MRI. So she underwent MRI scan, which was done in August 26 this year.
Okay, before you go to MRI, would you want to prove what kind of malignancy you're dealing with, even though you suspect what it is?
For the diagnosis confirmation, as there is a growth, I would like to do the biopsy from the growth, sir.
Yeah, that is important, no?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Go on.
So she underwent a MRI pelvis, which is suggestive of a circumferential symmetrical wall thickening noted at the sigmoid rectosigmoid junction and proximal rectum at a distance of 14.5 centimeters from the anal verge, involving all layers with fat standing and fat.
Okay, hang on, Shravan, hang on. On examination, you said it was 6 to 7 centimeters from anal verge, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. But this scan was dated August, sir. But meanwhile, the patient is presented in late November. So,
lengthening of a growth is not commonly seen, man. Huh?
Yes.
I am a little okay. Anyway, go on. Okay.
And there's a large diverticulum of 2.3 to 2.1 centimeter arising from the right posterior wall of the sigmoid colon, and there were multiple regional lymphadenopathy.
Okay. So just going on that report,
yes,
how would you stage this tumor in terms of TNN?
TNM, so this is a wall limited growth, so it is not extended beyond any adjacent structures or organs. So T3 disease, and multiple regional lymphadenopathy, which is N3.
So I think if I'm not wrong, AJCC 8 no longer has N3. Okay, it's N2 only, right? So I will check that up as you go with your case. From what I remember, there is no longer N3. Okay. So yeah, but the rest T3 bit I agree. Okay, go on.
So this is the sagittal imaging of the MRI, which is suggestive of a large growth in the middle and upper third of the rectum, and with loss of.
Can you point it out, please?
Yeah, this was a growth. Here it is started growth, and this was extended. This was.
No, this is not the growth. So the growth is very high, man.
Sir, this was a very
But I mean, from the limited images, and it would have been nicer if this was vertical rather than horizontal. But this does not. This appears like a growth that is starting above, but coming down also.
Yes,
So
sir,
maybe
rectum
what you felt was the tip of the growth and not the actual growth itself,
Yes, sir.
right? Because there is a lot of, it's starting very high up.
Yes, sir.
I mean, if you can see, it is almost starting at an S1, S2, this one.
Yes,
So likely what the MRI said is more appropriate than your finding. So in that case, what you should say is that, you only the growth tip is palpable. Okay, that's what I feel. Do we have a more recent imaging?
yes, sir, we have.
Can we see that?
Yes. So this is a CT which was done in the November 15th. So this was a large rectal growth occupying the middle and upper third of the rectum.
But now it is T4, man.
Yes, and now because of there is a uterus involvement here, so now it has infiltrated the uterus. So T4 disease.
Oh.
So and there are mesorectal nodes also, sir.
Yeah. Agree. Okay.
And there is a paralytic lymphadenopathy also, sir.
Where can you point that out?
Yes, sir. This is,
No, man. Not convinced. What I think more is to your left. There is some interarticular node there. If on your left, yeah, that is what this again. We need full cuts, but I think this may not be okay. So you now have and what about the kidney status?
there is a right hydronephrosis because
yeah. Okay. So what likely you're now dealing with is a T4 N plus M1 disease. Why do I say M1 disease? Give me two reasons.
Because of the non-regional paralytic interaortic lymph nodes.
Any other reason? Why does she have the dilated kidney, man?
Okay, it is because of the maybe ureteric involvement.
Likely peritoneal disease causing ureteric involvement, no?
Okay.
It can be like since it is extended to the uterus, now it can also be involving the ureter at its entry. So it could be just a T4, or one of the likelihoods in a patient who's been untreated for this long is that you could have developed peritoneal disease, which is also causing ureteric obstruction. Okay, right. Fair enough. So what do you want to do?
So I would confirm the diagnosis with the rectal mass biopsy.
Okay, and what did that say?
So this was a rectal mass biopsy, which is suggestive of a severely dysplastic viloglandular proliferation with an extensive stromal response of the lamina propria, suggestive of adenocarcinoma of the moderately differentiated histology.
Okay. Any reason that you find that you want to do IHC on this? Yes or no?
Yes, sir, because she is a female lady.
So what?
Because of the uterine involvement, whether it is a primary originator.
See, okay, besides the exam, would you do an IHC on this? Forget what you had to reply in the exam. In your OPD, if this patient came to you with this report, would you do an IHC?
No.
Excellent. Yeah. So there's no reason to do. No. Why would you do? Clearly saying adeno-CA and your clinical findings as well as your radiological findings are okay with it. So why would you do an IHC?
Yes.
Okay. Then? So you have all your diagnostic investigations with you. Yes. How will you treat this lady?
So except the interaortocaval lymph nodal disease, it is by and large T4 disease with the adeno-CA. Moderately differentiated rectum. So still as a patient, first, like I would like to manage this patient as a patient presentation itself is a spurious diarrhea. I'll ask my surgical colleague to consider for the diversion stoma.
Yeah, so good point, Shravan, and I would like all the residents to make a note of this. I mean, just don't start off with CTRT, chemo and all that. He clearly said that there was a history of spurious diarrhea, so we need to address that first. And, sending it to the surgeon for a possibility of a covering stoma is important. Good. Next.
After the covering stoma, I would like to treat.
What else would that surgical evaluation help you with, Sean?
Surgical.
Something that we briefly discussed during the earlier
Staging lab.
part. So the other thing is when they do a stoma, they will also look at the peritoneum, right?
Staging
So to give you an idea of whether there's any peritoneal disease or not,
Yes.
and there is a likelihood in this patient, right?
Yes.
Okay, go on.
So I would like to treat this patient with a curative intent. So we'll proceed with the neoadjuvant chemotherapy, radiotherapy, chemoradiotherapy.
Okay. What would be your preference for radiotherapy? What would be your preference for, what are the options for radiotherapy? What are the options for chemotherapy?
So options for options for the radiotherapy modalities of short course RT and the long course RT, sir. There was no difference.
Why would you choose what you want to choose?
Okay. So I would like to choose this patient for long course RT. Only indications of short course RT is in the resource setting, low income countries are if there.
That is incorrect. No. Short course RT and chemo followed versus long course chemo radiation, there is more and more evidence. I mean, there is enough evidence to say they are largely equivalent. Okay, so it is not a resource constraint thing. Okay, I would like to disagree with you on that. So, and the other thing is, okay, assuming you give long course chemo radiation, what would you do for the fact that she probably has metastatic disease? What are you going to do for that?
So I would like to cover with chemotherapy also, sir.
Was that so? What would you do?
So I would like to prefer her to give 5FU based concurrent chemoradiotherapy.
That's essentially a sensitizing agent only, no?
And followed by the chemotherapy.
Okay. Any evidence for this approach?
So we have the evidence, sir. Rapido trial, total neoadjuvant therapy.
No, Rapido use short course, nahi.
In long course with
the evidence in Rapido was short course and chemo versus long course chemo radiation. No, where did they give chemo after long course?
In short course, we have the evidence from phase.
But you are giving long course, no?
Yes, a Polish to study phase 3. We have.
Okay, there's also the Prodigy study, no, where they give NACTRT followed by FOLFIRINOX.
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay. Yeah, so I think either of the approaches is valid, though we would prefer maybe short course RT. And then one other thing is that considering that this patient has limited disease, you would not be incorrect in doing a checking for molecular markers also, okay? Because she, after all, does have paralytic nodes also involved, right?
Yes.
Okay, I guess that should be enough. I mean, good presentation, Shravan. Maybe the lab report, the person presenting the lab report can take over.
Thank you.
Yeah, Lakshma, you can just show the lab report. I think it's already 9:41, so we'll just have a brief 5-minute. The first page of that report. Okay,
Yes,
I mean,
ma'am.
next time I think you need to de-identify the reports. You've de-identified. Okay. Yeah, sure. So can you just read the report and
The indication for this test was early onset recurrent high-grade serous adenocarcinoma of the ovary with family history of colon cancer in mother and lung cancer in maternal grandfather. It's a germline multi-gene hereditary cancer panel NGS analysis. They have found pathogenic variants in BRCA2 gene, C6341 deletion on P.
okay, so two things. One, I think for the first thing that you need to check is this sample. What sample have you tested this on? Is it blood or is it on the tissue?
If it is a germline testing, we send blood. If it is a somatic, we do it on the tumor cell.
Yes. So the important thing is that, you didn't see the sample type. The sample type is the blood, right?
Blood.
So this is a germline testing that is done. Okay. And second is that, of course, for this patient, you said she also had a history, family history of colon cancer, right?
Yes.
So if somebody with a family history of colon and ovary, anything else you would want to look for? I mean, any other genes that you would like to look for?
Lynch syndrome genes.
Yes, so those are the other things that you would want to look for. Anyways, for then coming on to this report, you first thing that you read was like a pathogenic variant. So what do you... Hello?
Hello. Yes.
So what do you understand by a pathogenic variant, and what is a variant of unknown significance?
Uh, it's a continuous process. They are identifying few mutations which can lead to cancer. If it is found to have any predisposed to cancer, they are told as pathogenic or likely pathogenic. If they are not yet confirmed, it is called undetermined significance, and the otherwise it is not pathogenic. There are four.
So if a patient had a VUS in BRCA2, so coming on to a very practical question is that this patient, of course, has a pathogenic variant. But if you have a variant of unknown significance, as you rightly said, that we find a mutation in the BRCA2, but we don't know its significance, whether it is or it is not associated with malignancy. So if you find a VUS in BRCA2, this patient has a response to platinum. Would you want to consider them for, would they have the same significance therapeutically also for PARP inhibitors, or they would, you would classify them as the rest?
Without that thing, we don't consider it as BRCA.
Yes, so you would not consider, PARP if you just have a VUS and BRCA2.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So then you have all of the C6341 del. What does that mean? And then you have this P proline 2111, and then
that is in a DNA strand. The location means.
So what does C mean? C basically refers to the coding DNA, and then that is the protein change that you see.
Yes.
So the first bit is the change in the DNA, and the second bit is the change in the protein structure. Okay.
Yes.
And
one more point, and just usually if you divide this codon by 3, this should be the protein level. This is just a cross check that they are complementary to each other. So this is the deletion at codon level 6341. If you divide by 3, it will come around to 11, right? And it is a frame shift mutation. Therefore, after P, you can see that it is F, S, and asterisk.
Yes, ma'am.
So this means it is a frame shift mutation.
Frame
so
shift
they may
mutation.
not have to write.
Yes.
So there are different, annotation for each type of mutation that is seen.
Yes.
And also, if you look at the report down, you see that variant fraction coverage, read depth, zygosity. And here it is written, the depth of coverage is 597 and the variant frequency is 56%, and they have written it as heterozygous. So can you throw some light on that? So what do you understand by the depth of coverage, and what is the variant fraction?
Not sure.
Okay, so basically depth of coverage is looking at because in the NGS you amplify number, so how many in this sequence, what is the number of the chromosomes that you have read? So that is the depth of coverage that they call. So if you just read 2 or 3 sequences, then that is not enough. So you have to actually read 500 of those sequences. I mean, the minimum depth of coverage that they usually say is 500, So to read that, to say that there is an adequate depth of coverage. And out of those 500, if you have 50%. So 50% means that it is like heterozygous. If you have something like all close to 90 or 100%, that means, you know, most of the alleles are showing that same frequency. So that will be something like a homozygous. I don't know whether I'm very clear on that. So it's heterozygous because, you know, only 50% of your alleles are showing this. Okay. And also you would like to, you know, this is like the NM, that number. So that is where how you identify that variant. Okay. Anything else, Seema, that you would want to add?
No, nothing. And only that is scary. Clinical variant is the last thing which they have mentioned. Not so. There are various data sources where you can enter the, if you don't know whether this mutation is pathogenic or not, or you want to confirm whether the lab has labeled it correctly or not. So because a mutation which is pathogenic versus variant of unknown significance is important to us, and this variant of unknown significance, it keeps on revising with time, right? Because the mutation which is variant of unknown significance today, it might turn out to be pathogenic tomorrow. So to get an updated knowledge, you can enter these mutation in those data sources. There are many, are there. Clinical variants is one of them, where you can enter them and you can get the full updated information on that mutation.
Yeah, for this patient, that ClinVar ID was not identified, so that is the other thing. Yes.